Everybody, it's Romania Black. We're on part 7 of Run with the Wind, the novel reactions, and we're at the prelim. Oh, it's kind of crazy. I'm really excited. We've gotten through summer camp. We had the summer camp chapters, honestly, have stuck out to me so much. I still cannot get over just Kakeru and the twins running in the rain with perpetual diarrhea. I can't get it out of my brain. And then all of the Haiji and Kakeru moments, I've been really, really enjoying going back and rewatching the anime. That's been a lot of fun. I am going to be very curious because we're only like halfway through the book and we're already to the prelim, which in the original anime, by the time we got to the prelim, we were like 16 episodes into it. We're near the final arc of the series because there's only 23 episodes in the anime. So we were well over halfway by the time we got to the prelim. And here this seems like it seems like there's going to be a little bit more with the final race, which I'm really curious about, or they're going to make stuff in between. It felt like once the prelim was over, we had like maybe one episode of rest and then it was time for the race. Here, I wonder if they're going to take more time in between the prelim and the final race, and we're going to get more in there. Because I'm like, one thing is there was definitely in the anime at this point more Nico engagement than there are in the novel. There was also a lot more drama with the twins and Kakeru than what we've seen in the novel. In the novel, the twins and Kakeru were like on the same page, and Kakeru's trying to hook them up with Hana. So I'm curious to know if maybe that drama with the twins comes in the novel chapters as we go. That's going to be really interesting to see if we get that. But I'm super excited, y'all. I'm really excited to see what ends up happening. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I'm super excited. I hope you all are as well. I don't want to waste any time. I want to dive right into this novel and see what they're going to give us. So let's do that, shall we? We're going to start chapter 7, the prelim. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. All right. I haven't read this in a little while because I've been working on the reactions, so getting caught up with this is really exciting. It's a nice day. Kakeru did a full stretch and took a deep breath in the crisp autumn air. The weather forecast he'd heard on the radio as he left Chikuseso predicted it would be 55 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity at 83%. And there was barely any wind. Ooh, that doesn't sound horrible. It's like 22 degrees outside, so I would take 55 degrees right now. I'd take 83% humidity. At this time of year, in the middle of October, there were often days like this with comfortable conditions for running. The ideal day for a battle, Kakeru thought. Joji stood beside Kakeru, gazing at a family walking by with a picnic blanket. Because it was a Saturday, the park was already filling up with people who'd come to watch the prelim, coupling it with a walk or a pleasant day out. They all look so cheerful. And here I am, my bladder out of order, Joji said. Are you okay? Nothing's coming out. Joji must have gone to the toilet at least 10 times since he woke up. It was probably useless to tell him not to be nervous. The drums of the cheer squad for each university were booming across the Showa Kinen Park in Tachikawa. Whether the team liked it or not, it was impossible to ignore the fact that the preliminary race was about to begin. We're already here! Ah! By that afternoon, they would know whether they would compete in the Hakaone Ekiden. It feels unreal that we're already here, and it's like, no big deal. It's just, if you fail, it's over. Kakeru couldn't find the words to soothe Joji's high-strung nerves, so he only said, same here. I like that. I like the idea that Kakeru is agreeing with him, not trying to be contrary or anything like that. I like that. Jodo was lying on his back on the lawn a little way off, his eyes closed. He seemed to be awake. His hands on his stomach twitched from time to time. The Chikuseso team had woken up when it was still dark outside and rode on the train for about an hour to reach this park. But Kakeru felt wide awake. His mind was sharp and clear. I'm going to do one more jog. What about you, Joji? Kakeru asked. I'll go to the bathroom, Joji replied. Kakeru parted with Joji and left the lawn to jog through the extensive park grounds. Athletes from other colleges were warming up too, intent on getting the feel of the land. Every time he spotted the blue tracksuit of a Totai student, Kakeru felt an unpleasant jolt in his pulse. He didn't want to see Sakaki. If Sakaki provoked him again before the race, Kakeru was sure things would escalate into more than just a squabble. Waves of people pressed toward the starting point of the race. Everyone was getting ready to cheer for their favorite team or athlete. Sparks flew between the cheer squads as they vied for the best positions to rally for their teams. Clad in black high-collar school uniforms, they brandished big flags and fanfare instruments. By now, Kakeru had sufficiently warmed up. He felt he had to keep moving, but it wouldn't help to tire himself out before the race. He forced himself to start jogging and returned to the lawn near the starting line. The Kansai team's corner of the lawn was easy to find, marked as it was with the infamous banner hoisted above it, the handiwork of the Aokatsu owner and the plasterer. The townspeople from the shopping arcade were sitting on a blue tarp, waiting for the shot of the starting pistol. The Chikusei residents had also assembled there, having finished their pre-race preparations. Spaced out at a reasonable distance, the bases of the other universities dotted the lawn, each with a raised flag in school colors, flashing the name of the university in bold white letters. I kind of like this for a couple reasons. One, I like that they established that there were people that came to watch them at the race, because I kind of did gather this feeling throughout the entirety of the anime, and I think it's just because they didn't want to devote time to telling that part of the narrative. But I kind of like that in the novel, they establish a little bit more realistically that, yeah, they are a university track and field team. Regardless of how little known they are, they're still going to be findable and searchable for the university. So the idea that people come to watch their races, the anime kind of glosses over that, and it makes it feel like it's just the 10 of them and they don't have any support except for like a few people at the shopping arcade, but they're just supporting from a distance. Here, it feels like people are showing up to watch them, which adds to the pressure of if they don't do good, the people watching are going to be upset for them. And it's like, it just adds more stakes, right? Our banner's pretty cool. Huh, King said to Kakeru as soon as he spotted him. Kakeru thought, is it? But when he noticed that King's fingers were trembling, he decided just to say yes and nod in agreement. I like that Kakeru is trying to ease their fears by going with the flow, even if he disagrees. In fact, if you trace the history of our college back to its roots, Kansai University got its name from the founder's respect for the spirit of Matsudaira Sadanobu, who brought out the Kansai reforms. Endless trivia streamed out of King's mouth like a broken tour guide recording. He was clearly jittery. Kakeru sat down, nodding along and chiming in at the appropriate places without really listening. Hanako had turned the square of the tarp into a comfy space with blankets and bottles of water. I'm sure you know the drill because we did a test run here, but I'll go over our strategy for today, Kiyose said. Shindo and Musa were admiring the camera crew's equipment, but quickly drew closer to Kiyose. Kakeru drew a simplified map of the course on a whiteboard. What's that, a maze? Prince said, squinting at the drawing. The course is simple, Kakeru said, partly an objection to Prince. He pointed at the board and launched into his explanation. First, we start from the base of the self-defense force right next to the park. We'll do 2 laps around the runway and taxiway. Then we'll enter the normal roads and go along the street towards the train station, under the elevated railroad or the monorail, then back to the park. After 1 lap inside the park, we finish next to the open field. We couldn't do a test run inside the base, but just think of the runway and taxiway as a humongous track, Kiyose advised. 2 laps makes 5 kilometers. Since it's the first time we'll run there and there's nothing around it that we can use as a benchmark, you might struggle to get a sense of the distance. We'll see how the race develops, but one thing to watch out for is getting dragged forward too much by the other runners who start off fast. Make sure you think about your own pacing. When you pass under the monorail, that's about 10 kilometers. The halfway point is at 11.2 kilometers, and when you're inside the park, you'll hit 15 kilometers. There'll be a water station, but if you miss it by chance, don't worry about it too much. From that point on, it's all down to how much energy you have left. There's a lot of smalls, ups and downs inside the park. Put on a spurt and dash to the finish line as fast as possible. Every second counts. I have a question, Musa raised his hand. What kind of time do we need in order to get a pass for the prelim? It would be helpful to have a rough idea. Kiyose was reluctant. I'd rather not say. I don't want you to feel too pressured. These guys could do with a bit of pressure. If you just let them do whatever they want, they'll be running like sloths in slow motion, Yuki said. It varies by year depending on the weather and how particular the race unfolds, but in general, if our total time is around 10 hours and 12 minutes, we're safe. What? The twins shrieked. Hang on, doesn't that mean that each of us has to run 20 kilometers in just about an hour? Joda said. That's running 1 kilometer in a little more than 3 minutes, Joji cried out. And remember, we don't have any points from the Intercollegiate Championships, Nico added. If our total time ranks lower than 7th place, IC points will come into play, and there'll be higher likelihoods that ranking will flip. We'll want to wedge ourselves into 6th place or higher, where the ranks are settled purely by the total time of the race. The group was shaken, but Kiyose was quick to reassure them. Don't worry. Kakeru and I will cut down our total time as much as possible. There's a lot of people in this race, so you should stick together as a group from beginning and hold a steady pace. As we do the lap around the runway, those who are weaker will surely fall behind. No matter if they're too fast or too slow, make sure you don't let other people affect your pace. Got it, Joji replied like a good boy. One more thing, Kiyose said. I'll give you a sign if the group in the lead is going too fast, but otherwise, you better try to sink your teeth into the people in front of you and keep up. If you let go, chances are low that we'll make it past the prelim. All 10 of us must run the whole race with everything we've got. That's our only hope. Most of them hardened their resolve at those words, but King and Prince already looked intimidated. Do you think we can do it? They whispered to each other. It sounds like hell. Mind if I ask a question too? The Yaokatsu owner raised his hand. Hanako murmured, Dad, and tried to shush him, but he plowed on. Those fellows from the other schools look like they've got a lot more people wearing uniforms than you bunch. What's up with that? Yeah, I was wondering the same thing, Katsu, the plasterer, joined in, looking around at the crowd. By my count, both Totai and Saikyo's got 12 guys in uniform, but we've only got 10. I was hoping no one would notice. Kiyose smiled wryly, like, shut up! Each team is allowed to enter a maximum of 14 runners in this race. Then, on the day, they take into account the member's condition and such and narrow it down to 12. Yuki pushed up his glasses and elaborated on the system. And out of those 12 participants, the race times of the top 10 get counted into the team's total. In other words, they've got 2 extra spots for insurance. Since Kansai had only 10 members, they would be disqualified from the race and lose their ticket to Hakone if even one of them failed to reach the finish line. Prince clutched his stomach, his face becoming ashen as the weight of responsibility hit home once again. Kakeru, in contrast, felt his eagerness for battle rise to a climax. He could barely restrain himself from breaking into a run. Let's all do our best, Joji said brightly, having given up on his bladder, to avenge the spirit of our landlord. He's not dead, Kakeru murmured. Soon it was time for them to convene at the starting line. Let's get going, Kiyose said. Well, aren't we going to get into a huddle and yell or something? King asked restlessly. Do you want to? Well, King hedged. He was too conscious of the TV camera following their every move, and he seemed to feel the need to do something dramatic. Kiyose got his drift. Mount Hakone is the most savage in the world, he shouted. All right, let's go. He strode off, as calm as ever. The others followed suit, some of them stunned by Kiyose's outburst, and others stifling a laugh. The people of the shopping arcade saw them off. Well, go get him, they cheered. Show him what you've got. We'll be waiting at the finish line, Hanako called out. The team waved in response just to her. Once the race began, the spectators were to cross the wide park towards the goal. Hanako and the others were planning to move their gear over and secure the team's space on the field. What was that about, grinning like goofballs when it's a girl cheering for him? The Yaokatsu dad and the plasterer sulked. All the cheer squads were thundering over each other now. A helicopter hovered overhead. TV cameras were stationed at various points throughout the course. Bikes with cameras were ready to film the athletes as they ran. The escort car, equipped with a loudspeaker and a TV camera, was on standby at the front. The crowd was buzzing with anticipation as they waited for the runners to pass by. The Chikuseso members couldn't help but cower a little at their first exposure to such a festive and feverish race. I never would have thought even the Hakone prelim would be so popular, Shindo remarked, deeply impressed. You know what shocked me, Joji said? I went to the bathroom with Prince earlier, and I saw people lining up in front of the cubicles for the first time in my life, in the men's room. All the guys running today, pooping, popping in and out, one after the other. I had the wrong idea about people who play sports. Prince! Oh my gosh. Prince was still rubbing his stomach. I used to just assume they had muscles for brains, but they actually seemed to have delicate sensibilities. Joda had a spring in his step now, as if he'd been lying on the lawn like a corpse earlier that morning. Like he hadn't been. He seemed to have overcome his nerves by concentrating hard on the race itself. So it's time to take our first step towards victory at Hakone, he said. Victory? Kakeru cast a sideways glance at Kiyose. Even if they succeeded in passing the prelim, it would be impossible to win first place at Hakone with this team. Kiyose noticed Kakeru's look and smiled a little. His eyes told Kakeru not to say anything that would sap the team's morale now. I love that Kiyose's like, now, Kakeru, I know, you know, we know they're not going to win this race, but just don't be a party pooper. This is why they're so great together, right? This is why they're so great. The starting point was packed with participants. The front rows consisted of universities that had lost out on seed rights by a narrow margin at the previous Hakone Ekiden. Kakeru could make out the blue Totai uniforms through the mass of people. The Kansai team was starting from the rear end of the crowd. Surveying all the teams from the back, Kakeru noticed the runners' physiques varied greatly. The athletes in the front rows from universities that regularly competed at Hakone had sinewy bodies from which all unnecessary flesh had been stripped away. Some athletes from other universities towards the back of the crowd were visibly heavier in build, or the shape of their leg muscles suggested they might not have done enough training yet. The biggest difference of all was the expressions on their faces. The athletes from the so-called weak universities seemed as though they were getting stage fright. They already looked unconfident before the race even began. It's brutal, Kakeru thought. Although distance running was a sport in which one had a higher chance of success for sheer effort, the harsh reality was that one's inborn physical potential and talent did play a part. On top of that, athletes' access to an environment where they could focus on their training and thrive as runners, with high-quality equipment and facilities as well as instructors, also depended on external factors, such as how well-funded their university was. Still, athletes gathered there all possessed the same firm resolve. They were determined to compete at Hakone. No matter their position or background, they all had to stand behind the same starting line in this world of running. Each of them would be forging the future with his own body right there and then, whether it spelled success or failure. That was why the sport was so thrilling, but also so painful, and more than anything else, liberating. Kakeru looked around the Chikuseso members in their black and silver uniforms. They had no excess flesh. Light, supple muscles stretched thin over their bodies. They stood their ground even in comparison to the members of the teams that were Hakone regulars. Each of them possessed the body of an organism whose sole purpose was to run. They didn't look apprehensive anymore. Their eyes were gleaming with curiosity and drive. We're ready, Kakeru thought. There was nothing more to think about. When the race began, he would run. That was all. Kakeru looked straight ahead and waited for the gunshot. At 8:30 a.m., the race began. Oh, I love that. I also love, even when we get to the prelim in the anime, they don't look that different. They look kind of similar as runners. So to know that they've all leaned up and trimmed up, even Prince and Nico, is pretty cool. At once, 415 athletes from 36 universities started running. The battle for Hakone Ekiden had commenced. Out of all the contestants, only 9 universities would proceed to Hakone. Kakeru kicked the ground in powerful strides. We'll get there no matter what. The race took off at a swift pace. Kakeru and Kiyose were in the first group of runners leading the race, a cluster of about 20 to 30 people. Kakeru was itching to put on a spurt. Kiyose, running next to him, warned him to stay calm, and Kakeru managed to hold himself back. 2 black international students from Saiko University were at the top. They quickly left the group behind and were already running and turning the first corner of the runway. The third runner, who bravely chased after them, was Kimani, a black international student from Kofu Gakuen University, another regular at Hakone. Kimani was Kofu Gakuen's ace athlete. He had run the renowned second leg of Hakone 3 years in a row. As he watched Kimani's speed far ahead of him, Kakeru could sense the pride and determination of an ace runner in his final year at university. As if the top 3 runners were pulling them along by an invisible thread, the first group sprinted through the first kilometer in 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Considering that the whole race was 20 kilometers long, this was an extremely fast pace. The runway was so expansive that it was difficult to judge the distance. One after another, those who couldn't keep up fell behind, and by the time they were rounding the second corner, all the runners were already stretched out in a long, vertical line. Kiyose checked his watch and glanced behind him. The other members of the Chikuseso team were running in a third cluster, along with about 70 to 80 people. Kiyose shifted right up to the outer edge of the course to make himself more visible to the members running behind him. He held up his right hand, palm facing down, signaling at them to hold back. Following the code they'd agreed on beforehand, he flashed several members in succession with his fingers. Keep your pace under 3 minutes, 10 seconds per kilometer for the first 5 kilometers. The rest is up to you. For the last part, he brought his hand close to his temple and made a rock, paper, scissors shape back and forth. Kiyose noted that Yuki and Shindo gave a nod and spread the word to the others around him. Are we going to ease the pace as well? Kakeru asked. Will you? Kiyose asked back. No. Kakeru didn't have the slightest intention of doing so. Kiyose gave a light pat on Kakeru's back. There'll be a change once we get on the normal road. When that happens, don't mind me and make your move. Oh, we're just having this moment in the middle of the prelim. I'm going to pat your back and do this little you just go get him, boy. What? Oh my God. Hanako had gathered up their belongings and now was cheering on the Chikuseito team as they did 2 laps around the runway. So vast was the course that when the runners were on the farthest end of it, they looked no bigger than tiny peas. But when they approached, a rumble shook the ground. As they whizzed past, she could feel their breathing and the heat steaming from their perspiring bodies. Hanako was stunned, stopwatch in hand. They sure are fast. They were even faster than when she pedaled as hard as she could on her bike. They shot past her so quickly she could barely bring their faces into focus, and they were about to run 20 kilometers at that speed. The 3 black athletes passed by, and about 40 meters after them, the first knot of runners came. She spotted Kakeru and Kiyose. Both carried their bodies with lightness and economy, and they looked calm, like they were only getting started. The crowd around her called out, "Let's go!" Hanako opened her mouth to shout too, but nothing came out. A lump was stuck in her throat. She saw the twins in the third group. The 8 members of Chikuseito were sticking together, clinging on so that they didn't lag behind, striving to get an even narrow lead over the others. The leaders are going at 2 minutes and 49 seconds. Hold your own pace, she shouted to them. She realized she was almost in tears. I remember this part of the anime. Now it all makes more sense why she's doing the thing that she's doing. Until now, she had never imagined that the sight of someone running could be so beautiful. What a primal and solitary sport this was. No one could support a runner. It didn't matter how many people were watching or whether their teammates were running next to them. In that moment, each runner was utterly alone. A single entity engaging the full mechanism of their body to keep going. By the time they had completed 2 laps, 5 kilometers into the race, the distance between the top 3 runners and the group had increased more than 100 meters. A middle-aged man standing near Hanako clicked his tongue and grumbled, "Shoddy Japanese runners." That's not true, Hanako wanted to say. Can't you see? There's no difference between the runners in the lead and everyone following them. Can't you see how earnest they look? How determined they are to test their limits? Not a single one of those runners is shoddy. She clenched her fists tight and chased the Kansai uniforms with her eyes. Don't let them win. Please don't let them win, guys. She really didn't know who it was that she wanted them to win against. Was it a battle against their rivals in the other universities, or against the peanut gallery on the side of the road, or against their own selves? Whatever it was, she wished fervently for their victory. She didn't want them to lose against anyone or anything. Come on, Hana, her father urged her. They're all doing well, see? Let's go wait for them at the goal. The plasterer sniffled and gave a nod. It was the first time they'd seen track athletes running up close. Blown away by their speed, they couldn't help but being moved by the sight of the Chikuseito team holding their own in the battle. Those fellas might look like they're always fooling around, but they're dead serious. They've really been putting in their all into running. Seeing them run brought home to this shopping arcade town folk. Oh, that's so good. They made their way across the park, bringing their blankets and water bottles with them. They had to secure a good spot on the field to get ready to welcome the runners when they finished the race. Hanako blinked back tears. It was no time for crying. The race had only just begun. She had to believe in the team and do her part. Clutching the tarp, Hanako strode briskly, making her way through the tall grass wet from the morning dew. The race entered a new phase after the 5-kilometer point when the runners reached the normal road. The first group began to spread out. They'd been maintaining their high speed, neither getting closer to the 3 leaders nor falling farther behind, but some of them couldn't sustain the pace. The first group was whittled down to about 10 people, and both Kakeru and Kiyose were securely among them. They were surrounded by star athletes from Totai, Kikui, Kofu Gakuen, and other universities. Kakeru noted that Sakaki wasn't one of them. He was unmoved. He didn't feel a sense of superiority over Sakaki, let alone sympathy. He merely observed that Sakaki couldn't keep up. But I'm going to push harder. I'm going to leave this group behind. Around that time, the staff in the escort vehicle were marveling at them. Well, look there, a couple of Kansai runners are in the first group. They're putting up a good fight. But of course, Kakeru and Kyosei had no way of knowing they were attracting such attention. They were absorbed in the silent push and pull tactics between the other runners, always alert for the next move in the race. Big track teams had enough members who weren't running to place them at strategic locations across the court. And across the course, these athletes could convey information about their teammates' perspectives, positions in the race, and pass them instructions on pacing from the coach. But Kansai had limited resources. Kyosei had to pay attention not only to his own running, but also to the others at the same time. Occasionally, he looked back to check on them. The second and third groups were dispersed now. Those who had dropped out of the first group joined those who hung on in the later groups. Judging from their expressions, Kyosei could tell that the twins, Musa and Yuki, still had more energy to spare. Shindo and Nico looked self-possessed, intent on maintaining their own pace. King was struggling, but still keeping up. Prince, however, seemed close to the breaking point. The Chikuseiso members were starting to spread out in a vertical line like the rest of the runners. If the team tried to stick together any longer, there would be risk that the slowest members would drag everyone back. The first group passed the 7-kilometer mark. Their pace for the past kilometer was 3 minutes, 5 seconds, slightly more reserved than the speed at the beginning of the race. It was likely due to pack mentality. The runners were wary of getting spent by the time they reached the latter half of the race. What's more, Kamani, the third leader who was running a short distance ahead of them, had slowed down. Kyosei estimated that some runners from the first group would put on a spurt just past 10 kilometers. It was a given that Kakeru and Kyosei would rise to the challenge, but he also had to consider the impact that would have on their teammates behind them. There were bound to be runners in the first group who would run out of stamina and fall behind. Kyosei had to make sure that the Chikuseiso members wouldn't be thrown when that happened. Kyosei edged towards the center line of the road and signaled to the group behind him, swinging his right arm in a big circular motion. "We'll make a move soon." He brought his hand close to his temple and fluttered his fingers. "You can spread out too." And then he made a fist and gave a thumbs up. "Best of luck." Everyone raised their hands a little to signal that they understood, except Prince, who was too overwhelmed to respond. "Kakeru," Kyosei whispered, "at 10 kilometers, it's going to be the first critical point of the race. Don't fall behind." Kakeru nodded. He could sense it was coming from the change in the breathing of the other runners around him. The battle to secure the most strategic position to bolt ahead of the group was becoming fiercer. They were hyper alert to each other's movements, restraining each other, waiting for the opportune moment. I just can't believe that Haiji in all of this, Haiji's like, "Oh, don't mind me. I'm just doing the job of runner and also of coach and also of side guy telling you all the signals." Like, is there anything Haiji can't do? Right? Oh my gosh. The sidewalks were lined with spectators, even when the runners got far from the station and approached the raised path of the monorail. But the crowd's cheers sounded distant. The noise caressed Kakeru's ears like the murmurs of the sea and quickly slipped away behind him. He was focused on the race. Once again, he became keenly aware that his body was moving especially well today. Sometimes, even when his body felt light, the result of the race didn't reflect his feeling. On the contrary, there were times when he felt out of shape, but his pace turned out to be quite fast. No matter how much he practiced, he put in, it was not uncommon that during a real race, his body and brain wouldn't align properly, giving him these false impressions. For the first time since the race began, Kakeru glanced down at his watch just to be sure. He'd been holding a pace of 2 minutes, 57 seconds so far. It wasn't a trick to his senses. I really am in great shape today. Even when the pace of the race goes up, I can push harder. I'll go faster. Kyosei seemed to detect Kakeru's confidence instantly. "Whoa, easy there, rattlesnake." Whoa, he said, as if calming a horse. "Wait for it, Kakeru. Once we're past 10 kilometers, you can do whatever you like. If they put on a spurt too early, it would be self-destructive." "Got it," Kakeru answered, and he made himself hold back without dropping the pace. Just as Kyosei had predicted, there was a of movement in the first group as soon as they passed under the monorail and the 10-kilometer sign came into view. Kikui's third year and Totai's captain sped up. Everyone except Kakeru and Kyosei was flung off. Kakeru clung to the two runners competing with each other, using them as a windshield. After about 500 meters of running that way, he murmured, "I'm going." Kyosei nodded without a word. Oh my God. Kakeru rounded them on the right and shot past them. He kept running to his own rhythm. He didn't have the time or the inclination to look behind him. It was enough to hear their receding footsteps to know that he was leaving them behind, becoming the sole runner in fourth place. It felt good. Ripping through the air, pounding on the road, this moment was his and his alone. It's a world only I can experience, as long as I keep running. His heart was burning up. He could feel it pumping blood to the very tips of his fingers. Still heavy, you can do better than that. He willed his body to transform even more. Like a fleet-footed beast that hurtles across a glassy plain, ever tireless. Like a silver light that illuminates the darkness, Kakeru cornered the turning point at 11.2 kilometers with perfect efficiency, like a cutting-edge streamlined machine. Losing any speed would become a sin. His whole being was made for running. Kakeru already held Kimani within firing range. Meanwhile, Kyosei watched enraptured as Kakeru gained momentum behind him, right in front of his eyes. Just look at that run. The beauty of a being who was born to run. The sight of him easily transcended any resentment or envy. Kakeru was like another species, a far cry from Kyosei himself, who was bound by gravity and desperate for air. Kyosei wanted to scream, but he swallowed it back. You are the only one. The only one who can embody what it means to run, as you're doing now. The only one who can spur me on and show me a new world. It's just you, Kakeru. Oh my God! Though he wanted to catch up to Kakeru, it is impossible for Kyosei, whose damaged leg was a ticking time bomb. He matched his pace with the two runners from Kikui and Totai. The pair were doing their best to recover from the shock of being overtaken by Kakeru just after their spurt. It remained to be seen how this turn of events would be affecting them when they came to the undulating course in the park. The only way forward for Kyosei was to preserve his energy and bet on the final stretch of the race. He had to give his full attention to his own run now. No more checking on the others. But Kyosei could sense what they were feeling. The other 8 members had definitely seen Kakeru flying out of the group. He knew they were electrified by Kakeru's run, a streak of dazzling light. After Kakeru turned around at the halfway point, Joji looked at him straight in the face. His breathing was steady, and his face looked calm as if he were only jogging. But Joji noticed his eyes were different. Kakeru's black eyes were gleaming, exalted with the joy of being in the midst of a run. He probably doesn't realize how he looks when he's running. Joji felt both envy and affection at the same time. And what about me? Is my run as pure as Kakeru's? So simple, so absolute as to be almost merciless. I want to run like that, Joji thought. I want to run like Kakeru. Nico was bowled over by Kakeru as he whizzed right past him. He'd known Kakeru was good, but this was something else. When he really gets down to business, his speed is out of this world. He was breathing irrefutable proof that there were chosen ones in the world. But I'll fight to the end too. Nico pumped more oxygen into his lungs, which were starting to scream in pain. At least in his will to run, he could keep abreast of Kakeru. The runners in the Kansai uniform were bound by fervor and strength. With Kakeru leading them towards the goal, they pressed on in formation like a glittering constellation in the night sky. Oh, I love it! Oh, I love it! Also, Kakeru running and leading the group, being the leader, and Kyosei basically having a confession moment. I mean, after securing their space on the open field, Hanako hurried to the course inside the park. The cheer squads were jostling each other near the finish line. Spectators had also swarmed around the area in droves, awaiting the athletes' arrival. Birds flew away from the woods in the park, startled by the sudden hubbub. Hanako finally spied a gap in the wall of people about 50 meters before the finish line. She squeezed through, saying, "Excuse me," as she went and made it to the front row. Since she was wearing a Kansai tracksuit, the crowd assumed she was a staff member and happily made space for her. Hanako checked her stopwatch. 57 minutes, 35 seconds since the start of the race. It must be early still, she thought. They're running 20 kilometers after all. Surely they'd take longer. But moments later, the roar of the crowd swelled like a wave. The cheer squads pounced on the opportunity, swinging their flags and singing their school anthems at full blast. The top runner emerged from the green shadows. It was the black student from Saikyo University. He was followed by another black student. Amazing, Hanako breathed. The two runners completed the 20-kilometer race at 58 minutes, 12 seconds, and 58 minutes, 28 seconds, causing a stir amongst the crowd. Their physical prowess deserved to be called invincible. Look, I jog for fun. I jog to stay in shape, but the most I could do, if we're gonna talk about like miles to kilometers, okay? Miles to kilometers. If we're gonna do that, right? Say, look, I used to do like 3-mile jogs, but now anymore it's like maybe 2.5-mile jogs, which is about 4 kilometers. Yeah, I do about 4 kilometers in half an hour. If I'm doing real good, I could do maybe 5 kilometers in half an hour, right? So by that logic, you give me 2 hours. You give me 2 hours, I'll be right on that 20 kilometers. But to do it in half that amount of time is insane. What? I am floored. I am just, what? Oh my God. She wondered how the Chikuseiso members were faring. As she clapped for the runners who had finished, she stretched out her neck to peer at the course. A figure appeared, turning a curve. Hanako let out a scream. She was speechless. It was Kakeru. The third runner to enter the final stretch was none other than Kakeru Kurihara. Some spectators had been whispering wouldn't be surprised if the black runners snatched the top places. Now the crowd went wild, far more than they had for the first two. They erupted in thunderous cheers. Swept away from the rest, Hanako called out, "Kakeru! Kakeru!" Kakeru didn't seem to hear anything. The sound of his panting whipped past her in an instant. Kakeru was looking straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the goal. He sprinted the last 50 meters as if it were a short-distance race. The crowd was overwhelmed by his run, which radiated his persistence and determination. For a moment, a hush fell over the crowd, as if a saint had passed by. Hanako checked her stopwatch. Kakeru had completed the race in 59 minutes and 15 seconds. Kamani came in 5 seconds later. Kakeru had triumphed over the Kofu Gakuen ace. The crowd buzzed with excitement. That was a Kansai guy. I've never seen a team from there at Hakone. They've got one hell of a runner. He's Kakeru Kurihara, and he's only a first year. Hanako felt like boasting to everyone who would listen. But there was no time for that. The next athletes were already starting to emerge from the straight line of the final stretch. Oh, nice! Look at you, Kurihara! I do think it's kind of shitty that they just discount the two black athletes because they're like, oh, they're black. Of course they can run fast. I'm like, racist much? I'm like, but also I feel like the two athletes that won first and second place in this are both fourth years. Like they've been doing this for 4 years and who knows how long since, in high school. So I'm kind of like, there's the inherent racism there of saying, well, of course the black athletes would win. I'm like, or maybe it was because they're really talented and like Kakeru have dedicated themselves to running for 4 years. But, anyway. When he passed the 15-kilometer point and entered the park, Kiyosei revved up his speed just as he had planned. The runners from Kikui and Totai sped up almost simultaneously, but he had no intention of yielding to them. He felt a slight discomfort in his right shin when he increased his speed uphill. Shit. But he kept his breathing steady and his face smooth. If the other two sensed a hint of his weakness, it would be over. Every second was precious. It was no time to be concerned about an old wound. Kiyosei didn't hold back. He kept accelerating. The blaring tunes of the cheer squads were crashing into one chaotic cacophony. He was vaguely aware of a few familiar faces from the shopping arcade shouting from the side of the course, though he couldn't catch any words. Kikui's runner took the lead by a span of a step. Every time the soles of Kiyosei's feet struck the ground, he felt a dull pain in his shin. Even so, he held on. Haiji! He was certain he heard Kakeru call to him. He poured the last of his strength into his leg muscles and tumbled across the finish line. With great effort, he moved aside to not get in the way of the other runners and felt his shin with his palm. It was burning. He came in 6th place, tied with a Kiwi runner. The time was exactly 60 minutes. Oh, that foreshadowing. Not good. Not good. When Kakeru crossed the finish line, a staff member handed him a bottle of water and rushed him to the side of the course. If he lingered near the line, he would get in the way of the oncoming athletes. How's everyone else doing? He hovered indecisively under the trees at the side of the finish line. There was another wave of cheers, and Kakeru caught a glimpse of the Kansai uniform beyond the crowd. It was Kyosei. Haiji, Kakeru shouted and leaped out of the narrow path to the field where the runners were directed after they'd finished. Kyosei was crouched on the ground. Kakeru dashed over in surprise. Are you okay? Kyosei wasn't too out of breath. Those who finished near the top were seasoned athletes with skill and endurance, which meant they could complete a race at their own pace without getting too completely drained. It was virtually unthinkable for someone of that level to be gasping for breath and unable to move after a race. Judging from Kyosei's even breathing, Kakeru said, "It's your leg." In an attempt to relieve even a fraction of the strain on his muscles, Kakeru poured the water from his bottle onto Kyosei's shin. He lent Kyosei a hand. Kyosei stood up and began to walk with a slight limp. Well done, Kakeru. The first thing that came out of Kyosei's mouth was praise. Kakeru nearly cried, given there were more pressing things to talk about. Right? Thank you, he mumbled, looking down. Kyosei ruffled Kakeru's hair. Let's go cheer for the guys. But shouldn't you cool your leg? No need, come on. Shut up! Oh my god, I want to see them rub. Did they do this in the anime? I'm going to go back and watch. Did they do this? Every time you leave Kakeru and Kyosei alone, there's going to be moments like this. Kyosei slipped through the gaps in the crowd and Kakeru followed suit, apologizing as he went. A fierce neck-and-neck battle was underway among the runners for 8th place, around 80th place. The fate of their team hinged on the total time of team members. Everyone was desperate. The twins, they're here! Kakeru saw Kansai uniforms among the knot of runners. Hanako was on the other side of the course, jumping up and down. Joda and Joji were both gritting their teeth as they crossed the finish line. Next came Yuki, Musa, Nico, and Shindo, placing between 80th and 100th. King pulled through and came in around 123rd. So far, so good, Kyosei murmured. Prince, however, was nowhere to be seen. More and more teams among the Hakone regulars had at least 10 members who were finished. We'll be in trouble if he doesn't show up soon. Kakeru jogged in place restlessly. He wanted to run again. If only they could swap places. When was Prince coming? How much longer? He was hoping against hope, his eyes boring into the shadow of the trees when finally Prince appeared. He's shaky, Kyosei frowned. Prince had long gone over his limit. His eyes were bleary. Run, Prince, you're almost there! Kakeru shouted, hoping his voice could at least guide him to the goal. I know, duh! Prince was fighting back vomit as he advanced, flailing his limbs as if he were drowning. His fingers felt strangely cold. Where has my blood gone? He wondered in a daze. I probably look like a corpse right now. He was clearly anemic, but he clung on, refusing to break down. It was 20 meters to the finish line. If Prince stopped running, the Kansai team would be disqualified. They had no backup member. If they couldn't go to Hakone because of him, his manga collection would likely meet the dreadful fate of a bonfire. He had to avoid such an outcome at any cost. Prince screwed up every shred of his willpower. The effort screwed up his stomach too, and he was assaulted by an unbearable nausea. He couldn't be bothered about a few hundred people watching him anymore. He let himself go and vomited. He heard some of the women in the crowd screech, "Don't throw up! Run!" Kyosei's angry bellow rang through the air. You're a monster. This is why I hate club sports. Prince cursed in his head, wiping the corner of his mouth with his hand. Of course he wasn't about to stop moving his legs. Why do you think I've followed along with everyone, even though I hate sports? Why do you think I spent all this time running and practice like an idiot? To compete in the Hakone Ekiden, that's why. Because I thought, for at least once in my life, I wouldn't mind sharing a dream with you people who have muscles for brains. Prince crossed the line at 176th. He crumpled to the ground and blacked out. I mean, 176 out of 451 is still, for Prince to do better than over half of the other runners, is pretty incredible, honestly. The Chikyusei members were sprawled out on the tarp in the field. Less than half of them had checked their own finish times on their wristwatch. The rest had been too overwhelmed. Yuki gave up trying to pin down their total time. Well, it could go either way, Kiyosei calculated in his head while icing his shin. If we average our rankings, we'd land somewhere around 85th or so. It's on the borderline. And if other borderline schools have enough IC points, Nico scowled at the sky. It's not impossible that we drop out, Yuki said. We can't, the twins wailed. Shindo and Musa were sitting quietly, apparently praying to their respective ancestors and guardian deities. King tugged at the grass. Prince was lying face down and didn't even twitch. Hanako and the townspeople sat around them, but they didn't have the heart to offer empty words of encouragement. All they could do was wait for the results. Kakeru looked at the plastic bag that Kiyosei was pressing on his leg. The ice they'd brought in the cooler had almost completely melted. I'll get more ice. Maybe the stand over there would give us some. He got up, eager to escape from the heavy atmosphere. Musa seemed to feel the same way. I'll come with you, he said, tagging along. They crossed the lawn towards the red roof stand. One glance at the other athletes' faces was enough to see how confident they were about passing the prelims. The teams who looked rigid were those on the borderline, like Kansei. As for the teams whose total time was clearly far below the threshold, they were calmly waiting for the results announcements. Some of them were even cheerfully pecking away at the multi-tiered lunchboxes prepared by the manager girls. There's all kinds of teams here, Kakeru thought. For some, running at the prelim was a goal in itself. They knew what the results would be even before they ran the race, so once it was over, they turned it into an event not much different from a picnic and just enjoyed themselves. It's not like that's a bad thing, but we're different. Kakeru was sure of that. I definitely don't want to stop at the prelim. I want to go higher. I want our team to become even faster, stronger, and rise to the challenge of the Hakeone Ekiden. That's what I've been practicing for. I'm prepared to train even harder to make that happen. I love that. I love that Kakeru has come so far and that he started out, like, at least in the anime and in the novel. In the novel, he's a little bit more hopeful at the start. And he's got a little bit more incentive. But in the anime especially, he's like, there's no way we can do that. There's no way, blah, blah, blah. But here, I not only like that he wants this team and believes in this team that they can go further, but I also like that he acknowledges that it's okay that some of these teams are here just for the prelim. Like, the Kakeru at the start of this novel would probably like scoff at them and be like, oh, why are you wasting space if you're not serious about Hakone? But here he's like, no, that's just their goal. It is what it is. I love that. Do you think we'll make it, Kakeru? Musa asked anxiously. We will. We'll go to Hakone, Kakeru assured him. Red-hot magma boiled in the pit of his stomach. Look how the team ran today, every single one of them giving their all. There's no way we can lose. Musa widened his eyes at Kakeru. You seem to have grown stronger somehow. No, I don't think so, Kakeru said, shaking his head. It's just, we ran pretty hard out there, so I think we'll be all right, that's all. Musa nodded. You're right. We are going to Hakone. All of us. Together. When Musa said it, it sounded like a happy fairy tale ending or a prophecy that they could believe in. At the stand, Kakeru asked for some ice cubes, and the clerk gladly consented, scooping the ice into a paper cup because they'd forgotten to bring a container. That was silly of us, Musa said to Kakeru. Just then a group of spectators passed by behind them. Oh, hey, there's another black runner. It's not fair pulling in foreign students like that. Yeah, Japanese runners haven't got a chance when there's a bunch of them around. They were whispering loud enough for Musa to hear. Musa's face stiffened and Kakeru turned to argue. Let them be, Kakeru. Musa held him back. I've heard similar opinions so many times, even just today. Well, I can't let them talk trash like that. Kakeru still wanted to chase after the men, but Musa gripped his arm. We shouldn't fight. The kind of runners that they have in mind are the students who are invited here based on their athletic talent. I'm embarrassed. I feel embarrassed for myself. They don't seem to notice the difference, but I'm not a fast runner. I don't have such a gift that anyone would envy. I'm just an average international student. Well, that doesn't matter, Kakeru fumed. You, me, those runners who got first and second today, we all ran the exact same course. They can't just... Kakeru was frustrated, but he didn't know how to pull it into words. He felt those spectators had insulted all of them. Musa, who lived under the same roof as him, Kakeru himself, and those international students with whom he'd never even exchanged a word. Somehow those people had insulted all the runners who devoted themselves to the sport. Kakeru squared his shoulders in rage. Kurihara's right. A voice came from behind. Kakeru turned to find a spindly man with a smooth-shaven head standing there. But don't pay them any mind. They're amateurs who don't understand what running is. Oh, it's Fujioka. I forget he's bald in the novel. I was like, wait, oh, no. As Kakeru and Musa watched, the man brought a bottle of oolong tea from the stand. Kakeru had the feeling that they'd met before. Without letting his guard down, Kakeru tried to place him. I know I've seen this shiny head somewhere. How could you forget this man you were obsessed with? Like, how many months ago? Fujioka from Rakudo. The name came back to Kakeru. Kazuma Fujioka, the captain of the Rakudo University team, the invincible team that won the Hakone Ekiden multiple years in a row. Kakeru hadn't seen him since they'd met at the Totai track meet in the spring. What's he doing here? Fujioka, apparently reading the question in Kakeru's eyes, said, observing the enemy. The Kansai team has grown much stronger now. It looks like you might even make it to Hakone. Fujioka showed the dignity and composure of a true champion. It looks like it. Kakeru answered confidently, his competitive side rearing its head. Fujioka locked eyes with Kakeru, who stood his ground. Then Fujioka turned to Musa. Don't mind the lot of them. What they say is foolish. As Fujioka walked away, drinking his tea, Kakeru called out, foolish how? What the men had said about Musa had got on his nerves, but he couldn't grasp exactly why it had made him so angry. Fujioka seemed to understand where Kakeru's unease came from. Please, I want to know, Kakeru said. Fujioka paused and stared at Kakeru, amused. Well, fine, he agreed, turning around to face them again. There are at least two reasons why it's ridiculous. First, their assumption that it's unfair to bring international students into the team because the Japanese athletes can't compete against them. What about the Olympics then? What are we doing here? What we're doing here is a serious athletic competition, not some field day at kindergarten where kids hold hands and step over the finish line altogether. It's only natural that individuals have different physical abilities, yet sports are still a realm of equality and fairness. Those people don't have an inkling of what it means to compete in the same sport, in the same ring. Musa was listening silently, closely to Fujioka's every word. Kakeru was blown away by Fujioka's calm, articulate analysis. And the second thing they're misguided about is this. They think it's all about winning, Fujioka continued. So as long as the Japanese athlete wins first place and gets a gold medal, everything's fine? Certainly not the case. The true essence of the sport lies somewhere else entirely. Suppose I got first place in a race, but if I felt that I lost to myself, then that wouldn't be a victory. People's times and rankings change from day to day to the next, with every race just like that. Who's to say who is number one in the world? Isn't it because we hold firm to an idea or goal within ourselves that we keep on running? That was it. Fujioka's words dispelled the fog inside of Kakeru. That was what he had snagged in his mind and infuriated him. Fujioka was impressive. He had effortlessly untangled and expressed in words everything Kakeru had felt and wanted to say. You haven't changed at all, Fujioka, a voice called from behind. Kiyose had approached Kakeru and Musa without them noticing. It wasn't my place to speak as an outsider. Fujioka bowed to Kiyose in a stoic manner and turned once again to leave. I appreciate it, Kiyose said. Fujioka glanced back over his shoulder and a smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. I see you've assembled quite the team. Uh-huh. I'll be waiting at Hakone. What X vibes! I know in the anime they seemed like just best friends and it was more platonic, but here in this it kind of reads a little bit like exes, and Kakeru's like, well, I'm the new boyfriend. Fujioka disappeared, and then he just went like Mariah Carey back into the ocean and he just disappeared into the trees. Throughout their conversation, he exuded an aura befitting of a champion, resolute and imperturbable. Stray thoughts flitted across Kakeru's mind. He might as well say, I'll be waiting at Nirvana, the way he goes on. And he came all this way, but he's not staying for the results. But he hurriedly bowed to Fujioka's retreating figure. Musa also thanked him and gave him a deep bow. Fujioka's words had invigorated them, like a powerful gust of wind blowing away at the thundercloud. You didn't even take a bag, Kiyose said, holding up a plastic bag. Kakeru apologized and poured the ice cubes from the cup into the bag. Kiyose wasn't limping anymore. So he's called Mr. Fujioka. He's an admirable person, Musa said, deeply moved. As you can see, to keep winning at Hakone, you need to have mental strength and intelligence in the truest sense of the word, Kiyose said. Then he chuckled a little. Though, he was always oddly zen. Imagine a high schooler nicknamed Training Monk. It's a bit grim, right? Kakeru and Musa exchanged looks and nodded. That's literally Haiji giving away that he went to high school with Fujioka. Like, giving it away. Also, it almost seems like Haiji's like, yeah, Fujioka's a good boy, but sometimes you want a bad boy, am I right? The spectators and athletes were starting to gather around the large display board near the finish line. It's almost time for the announcement, Kiyose said. Let's go. Musa trotted towards the Kansai base. Kakeru matched Kiyose's pace, treading carefully across the lawn, and of course he did. Though he wanted to know how they had done, the results were out of their hands now, and nothing could change that. What dominated his mind was instead Fujioka's presence. Fujioka's power to put emotions into words. His level-headed insight that enabled him to carefully analyze the doubt, anger, or fear inside himself. Fujioka was strong. The speed of his run was exceptional, but more than that, the strength of his spirit, from which the run derived, was formidable. While I'd been throwing myself blindly at running, Fujioka was probably pursuing the sport at a much deeper level, constantly scrutinizing himself. Kakeru felt a peculiar sensation rush over him. He felt utterly defeated and inspired in equal measures. What I've been missing is words. All I've ever done was let whatever was bothering me hang over like a gray fog. From now on, that has to change. I'll become faster than Fujioka. And for that, I need to know myself, who I am as a runner. That must be what Kiyose means by strength. I think I'm starting to get it, Kakeru said. All right. Kiyose looked satisfied. Oh my God, yes! Give me this. Yes, please. Okay. Oh my God. I remember that in the anime when we came down to like the top 10 teams, you were like, they're gonna make it. And it was like, ah! But how will the novel handle it? A student in a high collar school uniform clasping a megaphone climbed up to the podium. He reverently opened a sheet of paper containing the results of the race. He was a student on the administrative committee of the Inter-University Athletic Union of Kanto. The assistant, a female student, stood at the ready on one side of the display board. The whole assembly waited the announcement, brimming with hope and anxiety. We will now announce the universities who have passed the preliminary race of the Tokyo Hakone Round-Trip College Ekiden Race. First place, Tokyo Taiku University. The Totai crowd let out a boisterous cheer. An older student slapped Sakaki with glee. Their team had stuck together throughout the race, and every member had finished in a good position. It was a win that displayed the high caliber of their members, the strength as a cohesive group. The assistant slid out a large white panel from the first place slot on the display board. The row showed the university's name and the total time of the 10 members, 10 hours, 9 minutes, and 12 seconds. Their ranking, averaged across the 10 members, was 49th. Just as expected, it was a really fast-paced race. Kiyose groaned. Kakeru saw from his expression that this looked doubtful for their team. He clenched his fists. Second place, the presenter read on dispassionately, Kofu Gakuen University. From a different part of the crowd came another outburst of cheers. That kid, King humphed. He likes to put up a dramatic pause between the rank and the college name. I wish they'd stop putting up a show and just get on with it, Prince was quick to complain now that he'd finally revived. I'm going to explode. The twins and Hanako were huddled together, trembling like fledglings that had fallen out of a nest. They announced the colleges up to 5th place, but Kansai's name hadn't been called. All the universities that had named were so far Hakone regulars. If Kansai didn't make it into 6th place, IC points would come into play, deciding 7th through 9th places. So there was a real possibility the rankings wouldn't reflect the pure total of today's race. 6th place. Come on, come on, come on! Say Kansai, say Kansai! Their urgent prayers were unanswered. The presenter intoned, Saikyo University. No! Is it over? Are we done? Nico and Yuki looked up at the sky. Kyosei was staring at the display board without a word. He stared so hard that his piercing eyes might have been seen through the white panels that covered the 7th to 9th universities. In accordance with the regulations, the 7th place and below were determined by subtracting the IC points of the university from their total times. 7th place, Johann Bunka University. Kakeru almost went weak in the knees, but somehow he managed to stay upright. It's not over yet. There's still 2 more places left. He felt pain in his right shoulder. He turned to find Shindo digging his fingers into it. Musa was half burrowing his head against Shindo's arm, muttering something in his mother tongue. It's all right. We have to make it. Kakeru reached over and patted their backs. 8th place, Kansai University. Oh, so they weren't 9th here. Oh! Kakeru thought he'd heard wrong. King pounced on him. Kyosei thrust his fists high and grinned from ear to ear, his usual calm mask slipping. Musa and Shindo fell helplessly to the ground. Nico and Yuki high-fived each other while the twins and Hanako slapped Kakeru all over, screaming at the top of their lungs. As he was jostled by others, Kakeru saw it, clear and unmistakable. Their name, Kansai University, glowed brilliantly on the board. He glimpsed a single tear roll down Prince's cheek as he stood outside the circle. We did it. The fact finally reached his brain. We can run at the Hakone Ekiden. Before he knew it, Kakeru was roaring from the pit of his stomach. Oh, yeah! 8's my lucky number, so yeah! Kansai's total time was 10 hours, 16 minutes, and 43 seconds. The team's average ranking was 86th. The actual time of Joan and Bunka in 7th place was 10 hours, 17 minutes, and 3 seconds, but the team had ranked above Kansai because of IC points. The last team to make it past the prelims in 9th place was Shinsai University with 10 hours, 17 minutes, and 18 seconds. Kakeru gazed up at their time on the board and heaved a big sigh of relief and joy. Kansai University had accomplished the feat of seizing a ticket to Hakone on their very first try. And what's more, the team had done it with a total time that was worthy of 7th place. Everyone in the crowd, people were exclaiming in surprise, Kansai's actually done it. Did you hear they only have 10 people on their whole team? That's the one with the guys who came in 3rd and 6th, right? I know their uniform already. Me too, the black with the silver lines. They're kind of cool. Kakeru felt lightheaded as if he was deprived of oxygen. The sensation continued even as they were clearing up their space on the lawn, even as if they were being asked to give comments in front of the TV camera one by one. He felt more breathless than during the race. He could barely walk straight. They had only passed the prelim. The real race still lay ahead, about 75 days away, at the very beginning of the new year. He kept reminding himself of that, but he couldn't stop the exhilaration overflowing inside of him. Kyosei had once said, Mount Hakone isn't just some mirage. It really was true. The Chikuseiso residents had come so close to that now. At last, they could see the real mountain right in front of them. Still on cloud 9, Kakeru swiftly folded up their tarp. Joda and Joji were still sitting on the lawn. With a cryptic frown on their faces, they were scrutinizing the results that they jotted down from the board. What's up? Kakeru asked. The twins looked up at him. Haiji said we'll conquer the summit, didn't he? Huh? Did he? Kakeru replied airily, but Joda wasn't satisfied. He did, but our time. What about it? Kakeru squatted next to them and put aside the tarp. Let's wrap things up and go home. I bet we're having a party tonight. Kakeru, doesn't summit mean winning first place? Joji said with a despairing look. Our time was 10 hours, 16 minutes, 43 seconds. Totai's in first place was 10 hours, 9 minutes, and 12 seconds. They were faster than us by 7 minutes and 30 seconds. That's a big difference. And we're only at the prelim. What about the kind of teams that would come out on top at Hakone? How fast do they actually run 20 kilometers? Would we get to that level before New Year's if we keep practicing? Joda asked gravely. Well, tell us the truth, Kakeru. No answer came from Kakeru. Are we going to get this business with the twins? Are we going to give this business with the twins next week? Is that what we're going to be doing? That was the one thing that I was always like, I felt like to conquer the summit, I felt like if I were Kiyosei and doing the team, it's like once you make it to Hakone, you're in the top 10 teams in the nation running. So it's like just the fact of finishing the Hakone is like a sign in itself, right? In that regard, it's like, as far as that goes, that should be like victory in itself. Now, obviously, I remember they had to do so good in order to be able to have a seated spot next year. But I was like, the only thing that I will say that I did not like about the series as a whole was the twins pulling out this BS drama, being like, well, if we're not going to win, then we don't want to do it. I'm like, we worked so damn hard to get here, bitch. And you're not going to keep doing it. So yeah, I'm like, Kakeru said you guys would get all the bitches if you got to Hakone, so what are you complaining about? But yeah, I like that we got a little bit more Fujioka. I love anytime that Kakeru and Haiji are together by themselves. Instantly flirting. Love it. I love the conversation with Musa. I loved all that. I'm not going to be here for the twin drama if we get that next week, but if we can just streamline ahead of that, that'd be great. But the one thing that's interesting is that we are at the prelims and the whole thing about Kakeru's past has not been brought up at all. So I find that really interesting. And I mean, maybe they're going to talk about it. And maybe it's just an anime only thing, but I feel like it's going to be in here because it keeps bringing up Sakaki being mad at him. But there's not really been much discussion about the coach or anything like that at this point in the novel. But we really are just barely over halfway. We still literally have 200 more pages to go. So that seems like it's going to be interesting. So anyway, I'm super excited to hear your thoughts down below, but I hope you all enjoyed this 7th part of the Run with the Wind novel journey, and we'll see what happened next week. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week yourselves. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more Run with the Wind. Bye!